The Omega Speedmaster. Professional moonwatch. The first watch worn on the moon. The perfect watch. A legend. And the legend goes on.
Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Watch World, and today we are going to be talking about the history of the Omega Speedmaster, one of the most famous watches in the world, while also walking up this hill here in West Cork. It's beautiful weather here in the Republic of Ireland at the moment. I got here early this morning before it's 9 o'clock, before it gets too hot. So yeah, we're going to walk up to the top of this hill, talk about the Omega Speedmaster, and hopefully take in some nice views while we do it. So Omega first released the Speedmaster in 1957. This coincided with Omega being the official timekeeper for the Olympic Games. The name Speedmaster itself also comes from the fact that the watch had a tachymeter scale bezel around the side, and also to coincide with Omega's other lines at the time, namely the Seamaster and the Railmaster.
Now, this was not the first chronograph wristwatch that Omega ever produced. That dates back all the way to 1913. Omega released a chronograph wristwatch and recently found 18 old movements from those watches and refurbished them to release this watch, with a dial inspired by the original design. Omega also released their first small wrist chronograph watch in 1932 and ran until 1943. This watch featured the famed caliber CH13 produced by Lemania. Eventually, Lemania was acquired by the same mother company as Omega, SSIH. Watches based on this movement paved the way for Omega to become one of the most successful manufacturers of Swiss-made wrist chronographs. Other brands also use this movement, most notably Tissot. Omega's versions were used by the Italian Air Force for transatlantic crossings. Amelia Earhart also owned a version and was wearing the caliber 28.9 when she disappeared.
So the watches were small by modern standards, and reliability issues caused Omega to start introducing watches based on the Lemania 15CH, or the Omega 33.3. This saw the 28.9 starting to be phased out gradually, and altogether that movement was discontinued by around 1943. Caliber 28.9 chronographs are now, because they've been discontinued many decades ago, now very rare and highly sought after, and usually go for very high prices with enthusiasts and collectors. So this brings us back to 1957, and as I said, the Speedmaster was originally designed for racing and not for space exploration. The original 1957 model was the reference CK2915 and used Omega's caliber 321. The CK2915 was known for its broad arrow hands and was designed by a Swiss man named Claude Ballot. I hope I got that name right, hope I haven't butchered it. But a lot of the features on that watch are still found on the Speedmaster today, namely the 3 subdial register, the plexiglass crystal, and the high contrast between the black dial and the white markers and minute and hour hands. The CK2915 also had straight lugs, a 39mm case, and a stainless steel bezel with black engraved print for the tachymeter scale.
The Caliber 321 is recognised as one of the best examples of lateral clutch, column wheel control chronographs, and it was used as a base movement by Breguet, Patek Philippe, and Vacheron Constantin in a variety of chronographs. In 1946, the movement was further enhanced by adding protection to magnetic fields and shocks, something that will prove to be very important later to pass the NASA tests. On the 13th of May 2018, during the Geneva Watch Auction 7, organised by Philips, a reference CK2915-1 from 1958 established a world record for a Speedmaster selling for 408,500 Swiss francs. That record was smashed in November 2021 when a Speedmaster CK2915-1, produced in 1957 and characterised by a tropical dial, was hammered for the impressive price of 3.1 million Swiss francs. In 1959, we saw the second version of the Speedmaster. This was the reference CK2998, and the main changes included thinner hands and a black aluminium bezel to improve legibility. The case was bumped up from 39 to 40mm, and an O-ring gasket was added around the push buttons to improve water resistance. The watch was updated again in 1962, adding the straight baton hands that we still see today. However, the watch still had straight lugs. In 1963, the watch was moved up to 42mm, and we saw the asymmetric case giving protection to the crown and chronograph pushers. It also saw the introduction of the Lyra lugs. This is the case that remains little changed in production today. The professional marking appeared below the Speedmaster logo on the dial during summer of 1965.
So this brings us to the space history, where we begin with the Mercury Atlas 8 mission, which was the 5th United States manned space crew mission, where astronaut Walter Schirra orbited the Earth 6 times in the Sigma 7 spacecraft in October 1962. So in a 9-hour flight where the main focus was on technical evaluation rather than scientific exploration, it was the longest US crewed orbital flight yet achieved in the space race, and it proved the Mercury spacecraft's durability ahead of the Mercury Atlas 9 mission, which would come a year later in 1963. So during this mission, Walter wore his own personal CK2998. This proved Omega's capabilities as a space exploration watch. James Reagan from NASA, who was in charge of hardware testing for space missions, said that the Omega was the complete invention. However, when it came to selecting a watch for the space missions, there was other interest, and watches were submitted by Rolex, Breitling, and other companies as well. So here we are at the top, hoping the wind is picking up now that we're getting a bit higher up. But I am trying out some new equipment today. This is the GoPro Hero 11 with the Windslayer foam. So I'm hoping the wind noise won't be too bad, but the views here at the top are just absolutely stunning. It's one of my favourite places to go in the summertime here in West Cork. Absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to stay up here for a while, get a few shots of the landscapes, and then we will get back to talking about the history of the Omega Speedmaster. continuing on with brands that submitted bids, Hamilton also presented a pocket watch, which was eventually disqualified from consideration by NASA, and they eventually whittled it down to just 3 watches, which were Rolex, Longines Wittnauer, and Omega.
The watches from these brands were subject to intense testing. Testing the watch in conditions such as high temperature, low temperature, temperature cycling, humidity, shock, linear acceleration, low pressure, high pressure, and acoustic noise, among other areas as well. James Reagan was quoted talking about the importance of the Speedmaster by saying, "The watch was a backup. If the astronauts lost the capability of talking to the ground, or the capability of their digital timers on the lunar surface, then the only thing they had to rely on was the Omega watch they had on their wrist. It needed to be there for them if they had a problem."
So of the 3 brands that were sent for testing, Omega, Rolex, and Longines Wittnauer, Omega was the only one that passed all the tests that they were subject to. Passed. The Rolex didn't. Rolex failed 1, I believe, if memory serves me correctly. Longines Wittnauer failed tests as well. The Omega was the only one that passed all the tests. And of course, all of these watches were hand-wind chronographs, because obviously quartz chronographs weren't invented until 1969.
The Gemini 3 mission was launched in March 1965, and 2 astronauts wore the now official qualified and certified Speedmaster. Those astronauts were John Young and Gus Grissom. 3 months later, in June, Ed White wore the watch on the Gemini 4 mission and had it on his wrist during the first American spacewalk, wearing it on the outside of the left sleeve on his spacesuit. Omega used these missions a lot in their own marketing campaigns, and the Speedmaster became synonymous with space exploration. Due to the success of the watch, Speedmasters were issued to all subsequent Gemini crews until the end of the program in 1966. In 1966, the watch upgraded to reference 145.012. These were the first moon watches as they were worn on the Apollo 11 mission.
Now, we all know that Neil Armstrong was the first person on the moon, or to walk on the moon, but he never actually wore his Speedmaster on the surface of the moon. He left his back in the lunar module as the electrical timer had been malfunctioning, so he left it back there as a backup. So Buzz Aldrin was actually the first person to wear a Speedmaster on the moon. His was actually the first one to be worn on the moon. Sadly, it has since been lost or pretty much stolen. There was a story, he sent it to a museum, I believe it was, and it got lost in the process of being sent to the museum, probably stolen, which is a shame, and it has never been found to this day. The watch has never been found. I'm just going to stop myself here. This is, as I said, this is one of the best places, in my opinion, in West Cork to come and walk. If you're into hill walking, this is one of the best places. And this particular area that I'm in used to be covered in trees, and it was gorgeous. But what they've done is, in the last few years, they've cut down the trees, which I'm fine with personally, if they had replanted new ones. But they've just left, I'm going to turn this around, they've just left all the debris from the trees here, which is a really sad sight to see. Unfortunately, it's kind of ruined the kind of picturesque feel that this place had, which is a shame. Which is a shame that they've just left it like this, but unfortunately, what can we do about it? But yeah, kind of ruined I wish I could have shown you guys this place before the trees were cut down. It was absolutely fantastic, but yeah, as I said, this is a shame that it's ended up like this.
Of deciding to wear his watch onto the surface of the moon, Buzz Aldrin reflected back on it, saying, "It was optional to wear while we were walking on the surface of the moon. Few things are less necessary when walking around on the moon than knowing what time it is in Houston, Texas. Nonetheless, being a watch guy, I decided to strap the Speedmaster onto my right wrist around the outside of my bulky spacesuit." Later on that year, to celebrate this achievement, a special edition model was released in gold, the Speedmaster BA145.022. This model was crafted from 18-karat yellow gold and included a rare burgundy bezel, as well as an inscription on the case back that read, "To mark man's conquest of space, with time, through time, on time." This one in the picture here was specifically given to then President Richard Nixon, with a special inscription on the back saying Richard M. Nixon, President of the United States. There were 1,014 models of this watch produced from 1969 to 1973. Nixon famously turned down the gift of the watch, citing its high value. In 1970, after Apollo 13 was crippled by the rupture of a service module oxygen tank, Jack Swiggert's Speedmaster was used to time the critical 14-second burn using the lunar module's descent propulsion system, which allowed for the crew's safe return. In recognition of this, Omega was awarded the Snoopy Award by the Apollo 13 astronauts for dedication, professionalism, and outstanding contributions in support of the first United States manned lunar landing project. In 1971, Apollo 15 Commander Dave Scott's Speedmaster lost its plexiglass crystal. He opted to wear a Bulliver chronograph instead, which would later go on to become the Lunar Pilot Range. The Bulliver was not part of the normal mission equipment, and he had agreed to evaluate it for the company at the request of a friend. This is why Bulliver are known as the only other company to have an official moonwatch in their catalogue.
Interestingly enough, the Omega Speedmaster was also the watch of choice for an expedition to the North Pole in 1968. This was led by a man named Ralph Plastay. Him and 3 other people used Omega Speedmasters. This was the reference 145.012, and they were mainly used for navigation purposes, along with sextants, compasses, and your traditional navigation tools. As space exploration began to break through new frontiers well into the 70s, the Omega Speedmaster was again chosen by NASA in 1978 for another space mission. After being put through a new series of very harsh tests, the Omega came out on top again, so then was used for that mission in 1978. The Speedmaster was again suffered to grueling endurance testing by the MRI Russian space crew between July 1993 and July 1994. Such was the exceptional endurance capabilities of the Speedmaster, it was given official certification and signed by the MIR space crew. Since then, this has led to the Omega Speedmaster becoming the officially most tested watch in the world. In more recent decades, Omega have made many different variations of the Speedmaster. This includes limited edition models, automatic models, reduced sizes, sapphire crystal instead of plexiglass, different dial colors, and different case materials. More recently, in January 2021, Omega upgraded the movement of the Speedmaster from the caliber 1861 to the 3861. This has the coaxial escapement that Omega is now famous for, and the watch has master chronometer certification. These are 2 massive improvements for the Omega Speedmaster, again, you know, kind of enforcing its status as a brilliant chronograph watch. So guys, there we have it, the history of the Omega Speedmaster. I'm back now, back at the foot of the hill, about to head home. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a lot of fun making it, and I will see you again very soon. Until then, take care for now, guys.